A&B Properties is Quincy's largest apartment rental company with hundreds of units available. They offer short-term and long-term rentals with 1 up to 4 bedroom apartments. A&B Properties meets the needs of its tenants with care, compassion, and a quality of service that exceeds expectations. A&B Properties also has a convenient tenant app for you to do your payments or make repair requests. Give them a call today. A&B Properties, 217-919-8080, Quincy.
And we are back for another rendition episode of Frankie Say. My guest today is Megan Duesterhaus. And Megan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
We had some really good email correspondence, and we had some texting correspondence, and we moved some times around, and we're doing this during a different time frame at lunch. And the reason why Megan is here today is because we are actually going to hit the abortion debate. We're going to actually do the abortion debate. What does that mean? That means that we are going to take a look at one side of the debate and the other side of the debate. And would you say that there are more than two sides?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know plenty of people, myself among them, who will say, I'm pro-choice, but I'm also pro-life. And sometimes the things that we're arguing about aren't the same question.
Yes. And so a quick intro on you. So you sent me, I already told you about how impressed I was with your resume. Megan Duesterhaus, PhD, she, her. We've got, I'm not going to give out your phone number.
Fine. Yeah, don't give me, yeah.
But you are the CEO of Quinata.
I am, yes.
But
I'm here today representing myself as a private citizen. I'm not speaking specifically on behalf of the organization, just because we have always chosen not to take a public stance on this because we don't want to harm our ability to provide direct services and our reputation in the community.
I think that is very smart. Your master's at UCF, which, by the way, you guys have an awesome football team
we do.
That I watch.
Go Knights.
Go Knights. I'm a big UCF football fan. Your thesis was a test of objectification theory in dancers and non-dancers. Mm-hmm. You don't have to talk about that.
It's really boring and statistical.
No, I mean, it's kind of neat. You've got, I'm going to go to the other page here that says something here. I was really on your continuing education. You're not the kind of person to just do this paper thing at a university, get your PhD, and then you stop your learning. Yeah,
those conferences aren't really very fun. I like something a little more meaty if I'm going to attend.
But you did back-to-back white privilege conferences.
Yeah. That's a really great conference. It's very welcoming. And I know it sounds like we're not going there to receive white privilege. We're going there to kind of dismantle it and talk about it. And I think a lot of times people are like, that sounds like it's going to be hostile to white people. Absolutely not. It was great. I loved it. I loved it so much that I went again, and I'm hoping to go this coming spring. So, and that really, like, that kind of conference informed a lot of policy work in terms of like my own employment to improve things in my organization. So it was very worth it.
Okay. So let's get into it. We're going to ease into the abortion discussion. The reason why we're doing this is timely because of the sanctuary city debate that's been going on in Quincy, and there was a big city council meeting. We don't have to get into those politics of that meeting, but the reason why we're talking about abortion is because I was looking at the timeline of the Frankie Say podcasts for the duration of the year, and this looked like a good time to slip in the abortion discussion. Can I start with a simple question? Sure. What is your stance on late-term abortion?
Like an abortion in the third trimester is what, I'm assuming you're referring to.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think that that is not something that medically, ethically, that physicians are going to condone for convenience reasons. You can't just get to month 8 and I've decided I don't want to be pregnant anymore, take the baby out now. However, I do recognize that there are a lot of serious issues, really heartbreaking issues that, parents to be that are having a wanted child with a name even find out some devastating medical news and are really forced to make a choice between how I've heard someone describe it as I give my child peace or I give my child life. And they're trying to make that very difficult decision. And that can only really happen, there's one state where you can do that in, out west. I'm more of the earlier the better. before you get to that point where you know that there's human consciousness inside of that baby, and it is really a separate person.
Wow. Okay. So you just said a lot of things that really positively strike a good nerve for me as somebody who is, what did I say in my email, that I'm a 90% pro-lifer?
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, I agree with that totally. I can understand why people take that stance. I feel like I have my personal beliefs on this issue, as does everyone else, but I don't, it's above my pay grade to tell someone that their beliefs are, wrong or inferior to mine. And so I'm also not really, those are like really big questions. It's like, what's the meaning of life? When does life begin? When does life end? Those are questions that are spiritual, religious, moral, and also scientific. And they're worth pondering. But I also don't think it's necessary for us to come to an agreement about all of those questions in order to like move our community forward in a positive way.
I think I agree with a lot of that. So a late-term abortion is, and you're pretty much saying, are you saying that you think it's immoral? If you had just your own personal opinion.
If I was pregnant and I would not, in that late in a pregnancy, there's no way I'd be like, I changed my mind. Like in my own morality, there would need to be some sort of like reason that like the baby was incompatible with life. Personally, and again, I don't know that this matters that much to anyone else, but I believe that at a point when the fetus develops a human consciousness, like that is when you can experience suffering. And so to me, if you're going to have an abortion, the earlier the better, because at some point during that pregnancy, like we now have a pretty good idea that the fetus is developing consciousness at a certain point. And that used to be mainly a philosophical question. But anymore, neuroscientists are really starting to like narrow down when that is. And eventually we'll probably have like a very accurate answer. Like for a while, it was like you would hear, these are mostly philosophers were saying, 3 to 4 years. Anyone who's had a baby like clearly knows that they're way conscious. Like, that's like, what are you talking about? That's bananas. And then, and for a while we were like, well, there is some kind of like electric activity, like in the primitive brainstem. But what does that mean? And when really do we have that sort of consciousness that makes us human? And we're getting really close to finding that answer. I think like the most recent one that I saw in like a research journal was maybe like 28 weeks.
28 weeks.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening at 28 weeks?
At 28 weeks, you, as a person in there, you can experience pain. You can experience suffering. You have like sensory experiences. You're basically experiencing like life as we, as a human, would define it.
I went to the interwebs.
Yes, it's always the best place to go.
Spoke to you know how when you've got a sniffle and you go to WebMD, so all of a sudden you're a doctor now, right? Because you went to the interwebs. So I will not claim that level of education on this topic by going to the interwebs. But that being said, I've been doing that a lot for the past 5, 10, 15 years. I think I studied it a bit in college, spoken to physicians, and to hear you say all these things kind of warms my heart a bit, because I think I had the wrong impression of you, that maybe you were this rabid, super pro-choice.
I was going to come and scream my body, my choice at you for 30 minutes on the podcast.
Yes, and no matter what I said, you would say, don't bring God into it, don't bring religion into it. It's my body. I don't care if I'm dilated and it's the delivery day. Until that umbilical cord is cut, I can do what I want with my body. You're not saying that.
No, not at all.
Wow.
But I am saying like the government shouldn't be the arbiter of some of those decisions.
Now you're speaking my language. Oh yeah. So the government, what do you think, we'll come back to the abortion part on this, but when you say that you don't think the government should intrude, the government should not interfere.
Right.
This is exactly what the COVID shot vaccine debate was about. And there's a lot of people who get new information and they can't change. There's a lot of, with social media and things like that, there's a lot of light coming into their eyes from the flat screens, right? And all the talking heads, and they get programmed. And I think that's a danger that humans, I think you seem to be aware of this, but I don't know if all humans are aware that it's different from reading a book.
Right.
Or reading a translation, like lifting the words off the page into your eyes. The light comes in off the screen and you're kind of hypnotized by the light, and that person seems to be an authority because it's on a flat screen.
Right.
And it got published, maybe peer-reviewed, maybe not peer-reviewed. But the point is, during the COVID time, there's a lot of people saying, well, the COVID shot, the vaccine, the jab, whatever you want to call it, that does not stop transmission. So can we change? And the government said no. And they're forcing corporations to push hard on those corporations to make them keep on giving the jab. So you sound like my people when you say you don't want the government intrusion. Can I ask you?
Yeah, I got a COVID vaccine, if that's what you were wanting to know.
I did. No, I was not going to go against the Hippocratic
But yeah,
oath here,
I definitely see there are issues there with like how far can the government go interfering in like our freedoms in order, to maintain public health, or in order to, decide that they're providing equal protection to all, humans that might be in existence in the country. I mean, those are serious questions. One of my big fears, and it's like usually when I say I'm pro-choice, everyone defaults to like, oh, that means that you think women should be able to choose abortions. Yes, but like the opposite is also true. I think that women should be able to choose to continue a pregnancy, and I am afraid that when you let the government in to start legislating what you can do with your body, there is nothing to stop them from deciding you're not fit to be a parent. So now we're going to go on the other end of it and start forcing women to have procedures that they don't consent to. And I don't think that's an unreasonable fear, because it's happened before with the eugenics movements in the United States.
Yes.
Which is that's a great point to bring up to talk about Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, was a eugenicist and a white supremacist and did a terrible amount of harm to anybody that she considered feeble-minded or just African-American citizens in the U.S. And so it's very dangerous, I think, to let the government intrude that way. And when I think about like being in a position where like I myself might be forced to carry a pregnancy to term that I did not want to, like it's even more terrifying to think about like my wanted baby being ripped from my body against my wishes. And I feel like that is a common ground that we should be talking about. Like the pro-choice movement and the pro-life movement should be having that discussion, because if we can agree upon that, we can at least agree upon what to do about that specific problem and save the other argument for like a different day.
I think that is well positioned on moving the debate forward. When it comes, now we'll come back to this when we're talking about abortion, terminating pregnancies. Let's pretend like you and I were trying to, me as a 90% pro-lifer, which by the way, the rabid right-wingers from Alabama, now they don't like me because I'm saying this. Right. Because
hopefully you don't have a lot of viewers from Alabama, but
we might have one.
Yeah.
We might have. I know one.
Sorry, Alabama.
I know one or two people in Quincy, mutual friends of ours, that are hardcore Alabama people. But maybe we're not. Hopefully, I'm not making them too angry. But if you and I were going to try to craft the law going forward, because right now I don't think the law is very good on this. So how do we strike a balance between, so if I'm a 90% pro-lifer, which let me define that, generally speaking, I view life as this is not a God religion thing. I just think that it has enormous value. And I think that it is sacrosanct. And I think the sex act is extremely important. And I think it's one of the holiest acts. I'm not talking about God and religion. I'm saying out of all the behaviors that a human can do, the sex act is extremely intimate, and it has consequences, like some of the biggest consequences that you can have. And so this idea of knowing what you're getting into as an adult, when we get into teenagers, like 12-year-olds, this is kind of, we're going into a different area. But when it comes to adults, two consenting adults, and they know they can use birth control, but they don't want to because they're lazy or they're undisciplined. And they know what happens as a result of coitus. And they go through the whole thing. And then the female becomes pregnant. And days go by. And then days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months. And then all of a sudden we've got a female can I, female woman?
Yeah.
Can I say that?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean,
Okay.
you're talking about like reproductive capacity. So in that instance, I think female is probably appropriate.
Okay, because I know men can get pregnant now, but I'm talking about like before. I'm using language before 2021. Okay, like the way we all used to speak. So this idea that a woman can become pregnant, she's 4 months pregnant, and she's like, I just don't want this, and use the term baby, which I really thought you were going to use the term fetus. But we can interchange baby and fetus, right?
I mean, I sometimes do that, and that's partly because I think that like it becomes a baby at the point of consciousness. So it's like, what week in pregnancy are you talking about? And I mean, I definitely feel like I have a kid, I've been pregnant, and I know what that experience was like, and I know that to me, like I did have a baby there before she was delivered.
Yes, and I appreciate that you haven't chastised me yet for being male and having an opinion on this, because. Not that you would do that, but I have been chastised multiple times by men by saying I may not have an opinion on this, even though I'm inside a state of matrimony where I was part of the process of supplying some genetic material to my wife.
Right.
I mean, it was like, I make the joke, it's like 15 seconds of pleasure, and then for her, it's been like 9 years of pain.
Right.
But not a very funny joke. But this idea that if we were crafting this legislation for abortion, how do we do it? Where would we stop it? For example, have you ever seen on an ultrasound a baby sucking its thumb and smiling? And when you make noises outside the womb, they react. And this idea of consciousness is a very slippery thing to grab onto. Like, how do you define consciousness? And we can talk about that. Are trees conscious? Are ants conscious? Is consciousness only reserved for the human mind, and everybody else and everything else outside of that cannot tap into that? I
think other animals definitely experience consciousness in that they experience like feelings, suffering, pleasure, harm. But there's probably ways of degree where human consciousness is different than like my dog's consciousness. Although he's very smart, he isn't a human.
Correct. There are different forms of consciousness, but you would say that your dog, how old is your dog?
Four-ish,
like closer to a baby or closer to...
He's like a 20-year-old,
He's like a 20-year-old. Okay, so he just kind of got started. Yeah. So he's got lots of life left in him. So that dog, so glad you brought this up, because I had a dog once, and this dog was far more conscious than some profoundly mentally handicapped people in my family. And that's a terrible thing to say. Like, that doesn't make me feel good to say that. That hurts me to say that. But... I have personally seen mentally handicapped people where if I say fetch, that means nothing. If I say you're ready to eat, they just can't even process these things. So who is more conscious, this human or this canine? I mean, darn it, maybe the canine. And how terrible is that for me to say that? But going back to our faux pretend legislation, if you and I are going to solve the problem, because this is a fun exercise.
It is a
Megan.
fun exercise, and I think policy talk is always fun. And I think that for me, I don't really want to focus on like crafting legislation that's going to do that. However,
go ahead.
I really am in favor of like policies and strategies that are going to create an environment where women can freely choose to keep pregnancies that they really want. You were alluding to earlier, there's a man and a woman and they get together and then they make this baby, but they're kind of like, we don't really want it. Like what a lot of times happens is there's enough reproductive coercion going around where women are, denied access to birth control by an abusive partner. They're forced to have sex. I mean, marital rape is a real thing that happens all of the time. I mean, it is a crime, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Sabotaging women's birth control, forcing women like, you better have this abortion or I'm going to leave you and the 3 other kids that we already have, or just being like so desperately in poverty and unhoused that women will make choices to terminate a pregnancy that they will potentially feel bad about. Like, it will be a medical trauma for them because it wasn't the choice they wanted to make. I am interested in creating a community where those people don't feel forced into making that kind of a choice, because if there's coercion or force, that in my mind is not a choice. That's not pro-choice.
Okay.
So
that's what you just said is incredibly valuable.
yeah.
What you're talking about here, you're talking about what people learn inside of certain religions. So I'm going to bring religion into it just as context. I grew up in a somewhat not overly religious upbringing, and my wife and I, we have these 3 children, and we're bringing them. We send them to a school where they learn about religion.
Right.
But my wife and I step back, and being adults and going through all of it ourselves, there are some things where there's some wiggle room in some of it where,
And I think that's fairly common. Like,
right?
I mean, many people are religious, but will also tell you they don't agree 100% with everything the pastor says.
They can go and listen to the pastor, and the pastor is saying, be nice to everybody. Be great. And we're like, oh, yeah. Don't hurt anybody. Don't kill. And we're like, oh, okay, we will agree to that. But what I'm talking about is, and what you're talking about is cause and effect and accountability. You're not using the word accountability, but maybe, can I slide that one in? For example, a man should be accountable, in my opinion. I think a man should be accountable for his actions. This idea of marital domestic abuse. And you know infinitely more about that anecdotally, through evidence, through your empirical research, things you've seen, and you're living your life in a way that you have way more access to that information than I do. But you touched on something that was really important. You said, you're pretty much talking about, we don't want to force women into these choices. And where I come from is, okay, this starts way before they even are having sex, before a man has sex, before a woman has sex. And obviously, there's technology, so you can have sperm donors, and then the doctors and the woman can just go in and do whatever they want to do without the physical man being there, because the man has already supplied the genetic material.
Yeah, they have the easy job, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will kind of bow to that. Kind of tip my hat to you and say, I'm so sorry. It's so easy for us, and it's so much harder for the woman. It's not fair. It's not really fair. Sometimes when I think about, I'm going to talk about the creator, as in, this is a simulation, and maybe we're inside a video game,
right?
And there's still a creator,
right.
And that creator, I'm like, I don't really agree with the system that has been designed all the time. Because, after our children were born, pregnancy, it was difficult sometimes. And then the delivery is difficult. And then the breastfeeding is difficult. Like, way more. Like, a man doesn't understand about, can I say correct nipples?
Yeah,
in the air?
yeah.
Can I say
that?
that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bleeding when you're using machines and pumping milk, and now the milk is red. Oh my gosh. And I look over at my wife, and I go, does that hurt? And she said, what do you mean it doesn't hurt? Yes, it hurts.
Yeah, like her toes are curled up. You're like, and she's like, why do you think that I'm positioned like that? Yeah, it hurts.
And now I'm the ignorant jerk, truly, for even asking that question. And what you're saying about making sure the woman isn't in that position, where I come from, we start with respect. I'm talking about
teaching kids like healthy relationship, everyday consent. Like,
yes.
it's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yes.
And even teaching a boy, here's what's going to happen if you do this one particular thing. And then teaching the young girl during sex ed. This is what's going to happen. And so a lot of times I think the pro-choicers are more, and this is where it gets a little bit more, a little dicier. The pro-choicers, choicers are saying, listen, those kids, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. You can't stop them. So you have to give them the chemicals and the plastics and the rubbers. You have to just give all that to them because they're going to do it. Whereas the pro-lifers are saying, that's true. That is true. But also we're going to try to tell them not to do that. And the pro-choicers are like,
yeah, we laugh.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. But then when it all happens, we have to find a way to get women particularly, or men, boys, girls, whatever, to do something about this very quickly. So, for example, there are people, you know how I said I'm the 90% pro-lifer? When it comes to rape, which is a very small subset of abortions, health of the mother, very small subset, incest, very small subset. Would you agree that 90% of abortions are kind of elective or at the discretion
but I mean, also in the state of Illinois, we have the Sexual Assault Survivors Emergency Treatment Act. And if you go to the emergency room and you say, I've been sexually assaulted, one of the things that if they're a treatment hospital, and they must provide you with emergency contraception. So if there's a sexual assault, we're trying to get on that as quickly as possible to make sure that an emergency contraception is not an abortion.
Right.
So yeah, the more that we can encourage, and then that's part of just being aware that these services exist, understanding what kind of care is available to you, not feeling like you're to blame and want to keep that rape so close to you that you're afraid to seek help.
Yeah.
Again, all these things are connected. So what we're teaching our kids when they're young is going to come back up and affect the other things that happen to them in life.
Well, that's brilliant, what you just said there. And as a 90% pro-lifer who believes that if somebody is sexually assaulted and they're not given that morning after that Plan B pill immediately, what in the heck went wrong? Why are we talking about this now when the woman is 5 months pregnant and now she has this, this idea of, again, this, not the legislation, but the policy really is what we're after here, is when a woman when that terrible thing happens, what should a woman do? What should she do in that moment? So there's crying going on. There's trauma. It's very bad. I have very serious opinions about what should happen to that man. That would probably, you might smile if I told you about all the terrible things that should happen to that man. And it's not just prison. It's way worse than prison. What advice do you have for women that they went through the act of coitus? Can I say sex?
If it's a rape?
No, I'm saying no, any kind of sex.
Okay.
Well, no. Any kind of coitus where there is the potential for procreation. What do you tell a woman that has had sex and she's on birth control, but maybe she missed some for the past week because she's just forgot, and maybe the man didn't wear protection? What is the education level there for? Because what I'm saying is, in high school, and I see this happen in high school sometimes, this just blows my mind how these things can happen to the tune of how many embryos, fetuses, babies have been aborted, terminated, killed, murdered, whatever you want to call it, since Roe v. Wade. Is it 60 million, 70 million? I mean, it's some unbelievable number. And how many of those are disproportionately in the black community, where it goes back to this eugenics thing with Margaret Sanger? That's the problem. What do you tell people, all people? What's your advice on, you had sex, now what?
Sure. I mean, I think that if I had a young woman come to me and said, I had sex, I guess it wasn't as safe as I thought, now I'm pregnant, I don't know what to do, I'm going to say, I'm going to support you in whatever choice that you make, judgment free. However, you're the one that has to live with your choices, not me. And I would not advise someone to go against, necessarily their own moral or religious beliefs. I'm going to do whatever I can to help you with the choice that you made. So even if that means keeping a pregnancy and having a baby where you're a teenager without a partner, haven't finished high school, don't have a job, I still support that. And I think that as a community, we should be doing everything we can to, on a larger sense, not just individually, but creating policies within our community and resources that support that person with a healthy pregnancy to go on and then have a healthy baby and raise a healthy child.
And how soon should, and I'm saying a woman, I don't want to put all of the burden on the woman, but ultimately, isn't it fair to say that the woman it's her choice?
I mean, yeah. And it's like you wouldn't necessarily know if a woman gets pregnant, like that partner might not know that unless they're told, right? So it could be, you could have a baby and like never tell the father. Like,
that happens.
Yeah, it does.
That does happen.
Yeah, for like safety reasons sometimes.
Yes. And so, again, I don't want to give the wrong impression. If anyone thinks I'm being soft on this, I think that 90% of abortions are just because it's inconvenient and they just don't want the baby and they're going to do whatever they can do to get rid of that,
right,
what they perceive as a problem. I think that those 90% things should be reduced as close to zero as possible. So even to the point of, and this is where it gets sticky, even to the point of legislation, where on one hand, I don't want the government involved in that, but which, by the way, I told you in our email correspondence that I am not pushing for some kind of like hardcore legislation that says that the government, especially the feds, because I got huge problems with the feds. I was not excited, but I understood, didn't applaud, but I understood and thought it was okay for Roe v. Wade to get kicked back to the states. I thought that was okay because I don't want an overly strong federal government. I want it kicked back to the states till the states decide. And I think that should be, the feds are doing roads, keeping the border secure. What else? I mean, whatever the feds are supposed to do, but they're trying to do everything because they want to completely take over and create a centralized body that is more powerful with every waking step.
So, I mean, it got kicked back to the states. We live in Illinois. We passed our Reproductive Health Act, but now what you're seeing is local municipalities trying to craft ordinance in opposition to state law. So did it go back to the states or no?
That's a good point. So it's coming back to the states, but we have this kind of local argument about now we're going to fight it,
right? Because
this is a red county. And so to your point, so what should be done there?
Yeah.
What should be done when you've got a state like Illinois? So is Missouri?
They tried to pass
state,
like a
right?
they're a red state. They did try to pass like a really restrictive abortion ban that I don't think went through entirely, but they do not have the same like reproductive health care freedoms that Illinois has.
Why can't the states craft something that is common sense? Why can't there just be a nuanced discussion?
Right.
So why is it's
because
to be a
nuanced
binary
discussions
choice.
are hard and they're fraught and they're painful. Especially when you're talking to people in your own community that you know. It's not the same thing as like going to the Capitol and like protesting and lobbying. You're sitting face to face with someone that you might have known since you were born. Like, we've avoided those conversations, I think, to our detriment over the past couple decades, because you see how we end up in a situation where we're all at the city council meeting fighting over, the next best course of action.
So this idea is taking us full swing back into the Quincy local issue.
So let me answer your policy question a little bit, because I never really got to that. I am more interested, like I said, in creating environments where people are less likely to feel they need to choose an abortion. So number one thing, housing. Housing first model is something that I ascribe to. It basically says that if you want to improve any kind of situation for a person, nothing can be addressed until they're stably housed. We are in the middle of a housing crisis. We don't have enough housing for low-income people. We don't have enough 2, 3, 4-bedroom homes for families. We don't have enough like condo-style buildings for older people. We need all of it. One of the things we're missing that we actually used to have is an agency like the Madonna House that specifically says, you're pregnant and you're on a really low income and you're freaking out. You want to have this baby, but you don't know how you're going to do it. Come stay with us and stay here through the entire pregnancy. And maybe it's even like 3 months after the birth where you're getting good health care, you're getting good nutrition, you're having a support system. Why can't we do that? I mean, personally, although I'll do it if I have to, I don't want to show up and yell at people at the city council meeting every week. That's like a terrible way to spend our energy and spin our wheels without really doing anyone any good. We could know we were helping people in our own community if we could agree upon, some basic goals without having to like pull in outsiders who are trying to, tell us what kind of sanctuary city we need to be here.
Yeah. And should the city council, if you had a choice between doing a 5 to 10 year education program on the nuclear family, I say nuclear family, I don't know if you bristle at that or not. I'm a big believer in that the nuclear family is being destroyed. I think it's being destroyed through lots of different things, partially by government. I think government comes in and really hurts that. But this idea of building all of this infrastructure to house all of these terrible problems, that to me looks like a Band-Aid. Not a Band-Aid. It's not fixing the root of the problem. The root of the problem to me is the complete destruction of the family. I think that the reason why you need, not you, the proverbial you, us, our community, needs all of this help is because the family is being destroyed. Okay? And I think the family is being destroyed on purpose. And I think that when the Quincy Council is looking at these issues, which by the way, David, Adam, and Bob and us during the green room, you said some really good things that were agreed upon by the whole group about how and why that happened. But before I get into that, I just want to ask you, do you think that if we paid more attention to the family, and I'm going to say nuclear family, okay? I don't want to see, I don't think that destroying it any further would help your cause.
I think that there are going to be some like ideological disagreements that we have in that area, because I don't think that the nuclear family should take primacy over other types of family compositions.
Well, I'm not trying to, well, if you only had a nuclear family and it was a really strong nuclear family, you would have way less problems. You would need less
So we've had that in the past, and there were less problems for men. I don't think women in the 1950s or 1960s would probably give you that same sort of rundown of what their lives were like. I mean, we know this historically because there was a second wave of the feminist movement where women entered the workforce in large numbers, and you have like the Fair Credit Act, and that's where Title IX comes in, and like women pass all these laws and really got out from under that model of like the woman staying home and being like the primary caregiver, and then the man working outside of the home, which is fine. If that's how couples want to construct that. Like, again, I'm pro-choice in all things pretty much, so do that. But don't make people feel like they must do that. And also, like, as an intersectional feminist, I'm going to tell you we really need to look at what has happened with families like in those other times, specifically Black families. You never had a situation for Black families in America where they were making it on like one person's wages. So like Black women in America have never gotten the opportunity to be like a stay-at-home mom. It just doesn't exist. So I think what you're saying, like I myself live in a nuclear family and I'm fine with that. I'm not telling people not to have them, but I think that there are a lot of other factors to consider that are much bigger than just that nuclear set of people.
Do you think there should be more nuclear families or less or the same amount? Do you think we should increase them, decrease, or keep them exactly where they're at?
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
I mean, we'll have to, that would require me to do a lot of prognostication that I'm not comfortable doing.
That's fine. Yeah, well, it's a dangerous question with a dangerous answer. Do you agree with the way the Quincy City Council handled the sanctuary city situation?
Yeah, I mean, first let me just say that like I was nervous going into that because I was afraid that someone would use, like there's going to be this large gathering of people with very charged emotions. I was afraid a bad actor from like either side or from some other side would come in and use it as an opportunity to engage in violence. And I was actually like, should I have safety concerns? When I first got to City Hall, one of the first people I saw was Chief Yates in his uniform right out front. And I thought, okay, it's going to be okay. the police are here. They know what they're looking for. They're going to keep us safe. And they did. And, we get into the council chambers. Everything was very orderly. There was a standing room only, but an announcement was made about the bathroom, which was like most important to everyone if you have to use the bathroom. And then the council really allowed like everybody that signed up on that list. There were like 56 of us. We were all allowed our 3 minutes. Some people didn't take the whole 3 minutes. If anyone went over, they were cut off and they accepted that and left. And so, I think that I was impressed with how the city handled the process. I know it was a tough vote because we were like asking some of the alder people to kind of vote against their conscience on the issue of abortion. But I think that they did get it right in saying like, this isn't something that the city should be focusing on and legislating on and putting us at like some pretty serious legal risk. I think that these kind of sanctuary city ordinances are designed to trigger a lawsuit to the Supreme Court with the goal of being a national abortion ban. And I don't want to be used like that. I don't want the city of Quincy to be used like that. I think we have too many other things, too much other good that we could do together without that being our legacy.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think, well, in terms of the national abortion ban, that goes back to the feds being probably, they should not be making. I mean, the feds, you and I are in agreement, the feds should not be interfering with our bodies.
Yeah, I think as a general statement, the less the government in general interferes, better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we've got a lot of interference with government, pretty much in everything. And maybe I'll have you on sometime again to talk about taxation, how much we're taxed, but we won't do that today. So do you got anything that you want to say, anything in your notes that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, do we have any time for that? We're way over time,
yeah,
aren't we? Okay.
Yeah, we do.
I guess I want to really talk about the sort of the reaction that a lot of us pro-choicers had when we showed up to city council. We came in really hot. We were in large numbers. We were obviously angry. Some people had angry signs. We did some chants. And I know from talking to people that were actually in favor of the ordinance later on, they were completely taken aback, first, that there were so many of us that showed up, and second, that we were so angry when we got there. And because on their minds, I think what it's like they just don't want Planned Parenthood doing abortions in Quincy, which I have sympathy for. But the reason we came in so mad is, one, because we're still real upset about Roe. Like that happened like it was a year ago this summer. We're not over it. You have women that if you were born after 1973, feels like we've had a right ripped away from us that we've had since birth. And for older women who maybe had to fight this fight like already, now they're being asked to do it again, but they're in like their 70s and 80s. And that doesn't seem very fair. I feel like we kind of dropped the ball on that we're having to involve people in a fight they've already had to win. But I think a lot of the reaction on our part was not a reaction to like the Quincy Right to Life organization, but a reaction specifically to Mark Lee Dixon and his brand of extremism. He is...
and does he want zero?
He wants zero abortions.
Zero, okay.
He was one of the architects behind Texas's Senate Bill 8, which is known, often referred to as like the heartbeat bill. So like there are no abortions after 6 weeks. In Texas, but they have
6 weeks or 8 weeks.
I think it's 6 weeks.
When does the heartbeat start
I don't
beating?
know.
It's 8 weeks though, isn't it?
Their thing. I'm pretty sure their thing was written 6 weeks, which is really only 2 weeks of pregnancy because you count the first 2 weeks are like the last date of your menstrual period. So it's like actually having a fertilized embryo in there for like 2 weeks. But they constructed the law so that like any person can file a civil suit against like someone who like gave a person money for an abortion or provided them transportation, or like a family member of the person who was pregnant or the father of the person who, or the baby, like they can bring like a $10,000 plus civil suit against them. And the idea was you get the government out of being the enforcer, you get people to just like bankrupt those that they disagree with by filing all these lawsuits. But one of the things that has created is they wrote this. Senate Bill 8 was very narrowly constructed, and it did allow for some terminations of pregnancies, abortion, fit that definition, when the health and safety of the mother was at risk. But the language in it was so narrow that once it was signed, the legal departments of all the hospitals and medical providers started saying, we recommend you don't do these things because you're looking at possibly being charged and sentenced to a life term in prison, $100,000 plus fine. So yeah, it says medical, but this needs to be like legitimately like a medical emergency. Like this person needs to have like vital signs that are not good. And that was problematic because you have people that will come in, They're like maybe pretty early pregnancy, ruptured membranes. Okay, that pregnancy is no longer viable, and you're on a time clock of how long it's going to take before the fluid in there gets septic, and you really need to get that out.
Right.
Same thing with an ectopic pregnancy. Unfortunately, there's no way to move an embryo that is implanted in the fallopian tube back into the uterus.
The baby's not going to live.
The baby's not going to live.
It's
they
a
were
common sense
They were
abortion.
having to wait until women were in like serious medical crisis at the suggestion of the hospital attorneys. So Texas actually went back in like a year after that and very quietly amended that Senate bill to allow specifically for those two things that I mentioned, the ectopic pregnancy and the ruptured membranes. Okay. There are a whole bunch of other things that can go wrong in a pregnancy that you might need a medical termination for. But I think this is a really good example of why we should not be trusting Mark Lee Dixon and his associates and legislators with no medical degrees to craft legislation, because there were women harmed by that in the period between like the initial bill being signed and then the legislative fix for it, who like had very serious health complications, survived, but maybe now like have with serious damage to their fertility. So they might not be able to have children again. Like good. That's not okay. No. Like we need to do better than that. Yeah. And also with bringing back Dixon's extremism, in 2019, he advocated and lobbied the Texas legislature for a similar bill to what like that would ban abortion. But in that, it was creating a mechanism to charge women who had abortions criminally and as committing, like homicide. And it would have been such that they could have applied the death penalty to a woman who was convicted of having an abortion. That is not a typical pro-life stance.
It's not good. And in closing, as we kind of wrap this up, I think all of the leaders inside the United States need to have the Epstein list revealed so everybody knows. Let's do that first.
Yeah.
Before we go crazy and not allow women to terminate ectopic pregnancies, before we do that, let's just get the Epstein list out there so everybody can see who these leaders are.
Well, it's all of them, right? Don't you suspect that?
It's a lot of them. It's a lot of them, and that's for another pod. So listen, Megan, thank you so much. I was very, very elated when you said yes to do this pod. I knew you were smart. You're even smarter than I thought. You are extremely educated. I really liked everything you said. It was very good. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Maybe
come on again
sometime.
All right. Bye.